The carriage that carried Marion Tilney to her wedding smelled of new leather and cold rain, and she sat very straight in it, with her father's brass counting-house lamp wrapped in flannel on her lap, because there was no one else in the world she would have trusted to hold it. It was the 17th of October, in the year 1843, and she was 23 years old. In 4 hours, she would be the Duchess of Ravensmore. She had met the man she was to marry exactly twice. The first time, he had not troubled himself to look at her. The second time, he had looked at her the way a man looks at a sum written at the bottom of a column, checking only that the figure was large enough. "You will sit up straight," her father said, as though she were not already sitting up straight. Josiah Tilney was a broad, plain man in an excellent black coat, and his hands never rested. Even now his thumb moved against his fingertips, counting something only he could see, the way it always did. "You will not let them make you small. You hear me, Marion? I did not buy you a coronet so you could carry it like an apology. I hear you, Papa. 40,000 pounds, he said very quietly, to the rain on the window. That is what your hand is worth to the Duke of Ravensmore. 40,000 pounds and the mortgages on his Devon land cleared, and the dry rot in his roof seen to. He will take all of it, and he will look at you, my girl, as though you tracked the smell of the docks into his drawing room." He turned to her. "Let him. A roof does not care who paid for it. Neither does a name. You remember that." She looked down at the lamp in her lap. It was a plain thing. Brass gone soft and golden with handling. A green glass shade her father had carried through 40 years of counting houses and ship's manifests and long candlelit nights over the books. When she was small, she had done her sums beneath that green light while he worked beside her. It was the only thing she had asked to bring. "They will laugh at this," she said. She did not say it sadly. She said it the way she said everything, as a fact to be reckoned with. "A merchant's lamp in a duke's house." "Let them laugh," Josiah said. His thumb stopped against his fingertips. "Laughing men do not count their own pockets carefully. I have made a great deal of money off laughing men." The chapel at Ravensmore was 400 years old and very cold, and it was perhaps a third full, which for the wedding of a duke was an insult so precise it could only have been arranged. The great families had stayed away. What had come was the merely curious. Minor cousins, 2 or 3 sharp-eyed dowagers, who would not have missed it for the world, and a scattering of the county who wished to be able to say they had seen the day, a Vane married trade. Crispin Vane, 9th Duke of Ravensmore, stood at the altar in a charcoal tailcoat that fit him the way only very old money could afford, and he was, Marion noted with the same detachment she brought to everything, the handsomest man she had ever seen. Dark hair swept back from a high forehead, a jaw a sculptor might have argued over, cool gray eyes that, when she came down the aisle on her father's arm, moved over her once, over the modest ivory silk, over the straight back, over the merchant's daughter, who had come to save his house, and then moved away, to the window, to the rain, to anything that was not her. He took her hand to say the vows. His was dry and cold. When the parson asked whether he would have this woman, the Duke said, "I will," in a voice pitched to Carrie, clear and indifferent, the voice of a man signing a paper he had read and disliked. And then it was done. And she was a duchess, and her husband let go of her hand the instant the law allowed. At the wedding breakfast, held in a long dining room where the silk on the walls had faded to the color of dried blood, and 3 of the chairs had been turned to hide their worn seats, the Duke of Ravensmore leaned to the man on his left, a fair, laughing gentleman with a soldier's shoulders, and asked not quite quietly enough, "Remind me, her Christian name, the girl's." The fair gentleman's face did something complicated. He turned his signet ring once around his finger. "Marion," he said. "Her name is Marion Crispin." "Marion," the Duke repeated, as though tasting whether it was worth the room it took up. "Yes, Marian Tilney, who was now the Duchess of Ravensmore, heard every word. She was seated 4 places down, below a cousin, and below an empty chair, in the seat a duchess does not sit in. She set down her fork. She lifted her chin 1/4 of an inch, no more, and she did not let a single thing show on her face, because her father had not bought her a coronet, so she could weep into the fish. She would remember, later, that she had decided it then, not in anger, not even in pain, but with the same cold clarity she brought to a column of figures that did not add up. She had decided that she would not beg this man for anything, not his regard, not his courtesy, not his love. She had been bought to save his house, and she would save it, because she was a Tilney, and Tilneys finished what they were paid to finish. What she did not yet know, what no one in that fated room knew, was that the house was rotting from a wound none of them had found, and that she would be the one to find it. The lamp went up to her room that first night wrapped in its flannel, and she set it on the writing desk by the window and turned the little brass key 1/4 turn until the green light steadied, and by that light she looked at the place she had married into. Ravensmore was magnificent, and it was dying. She could see both things at once. Her father had taught her to see both things at once. The great staircase was carved oak, and the carpet on it was worn to the weave. The portraits climbing the stair were veins 4 centuries deep, and the gilt on their frames was flaking. And behind one of them, she would learn, there was a damp stain spreading like a continent. There were 40 bedrooms and fires lit in 4. There was a marble hall that rang like a cathedral, and not enough coal in the cellar to warm it. A woman came in with a can of hot water, older, square, gray hair under a plain cap, hands red from work. She set the can down and looked at Marian, and at the lamp, and at the green light, and something in her square face shifted. "You'll be wanting your candle, Your Grace," the woman said. "We don't generally, that is, the family don't generally use such a lamp." "My father uses one like it to count his money," Marian said. "I find I count better by it too." She turned from the window. "What is your name?" The woman blinked. It was not, Marian gathered, a question that was much asked of her in this house. "Goodale, Your Grace. Mrs. Goodale, housekeeper here, going on 19 years. Mrs. Goodale." Marian inclined her head, the precise, courteous inclination her mother had taught her before she died, the one that acknowledged a person as a person. "Thank you for the water, and for the warning about the lamp. I shall keep it. But I am glad to know how things are done here, so I do not give offense by accident. I would rather give it on purpose when it is earned." Mrs. Goodale smoothed her apron flat with both hands, slowly, both palms pressing down the length of it. Then she said, in a different voice, lower, careful, "There's not many in this house earned offense, Your Grace. There's some, but not many. We've been a long time waiting for someone to set things right." She stopped, as though she had said more than she meant to. "I'll bring your chocolate at 8. When she had gone, Marian sat a long while by the green light, and she thought, set things right, not put things back. Set things right. A housekeeper of 19 years chose her words the way a merchant chose his. There was a difference between an estate that was poor and an estate that was wrong, and Mrs. Goodale, without quite saying it, had told her which this was. She did not sleep much. She made a list instead, in her own small, clear hand. By the lamp, her husband's house disdained. At the top, she wrote, "Find out where the money goes." The Duke did not come to her that night, nor any night, and she had not expected him to. Their marriage was a contract. He had told her so, with his eyes at the altar. She breakfasted alone in the morning room while he rode his lands, and when they met in passing on the stair, he gave her the bow he would have given a creditor, correct, brief, cold. And once, when she said good morning, he looked faintly surprised that she had spoken, as though the furniture had addressed him. She learned the house, the way she had learned her father's business as a girl. From the bottom. She went to the kitchens and learned the cook had not been paid her wages in 5 months and had stayed out of loyalty to Mrs. Goodale. She went to the stables and learned there were 9 horses eating their heads off and a stable boy who slept in the straw because his room had no fire. She walked the home farm and saw the drainage gone to ruin and the tenants' roofs falling in, and an old tenant named Hartley who pulled off his cap and could not meet her eye when she asked how the rents were collected. "The steward sees to that, Your Grace," he said. "Mr. Brandt, we pay what we can." "And does Mr. Brandt note down what you pay?" The old man turned his cap in his hands. "He writes in his book, Your Grace. He always writes in his book." She filed that away with the rest, Mr. Brandt and his book. Septimus Brandt was the estate steward, and he had been steward to the 8th Duke, and now to the 9th. And he was a smooth gray man of perhaps 50 with soft hands for a man who managed land. And the first time Marian asked to see the estate accounts, he smiled at her, as one smiles at a child who is asked to drive the carriage. "The accounts are a great tangle, Your Grace, not fit for a lady's afternoon," he said. "His Grace leaves all that to me. I shouldn't like to trouble you with it." "It is no trouble," Marian said pleasantly. "I have a head for figures. My father trained me at his own desk. I should like to understand the estate I have married into." "His Grace," said Mr. Brandt, and the smile did not move, but something behind it did, "would not wish the Duchess fatigued with the books." She let it go. She was very good at letting things go in a way that closed nothing. She thanked him and went away. And that night, she wrote in her small, clear hand, beneath the first line, "Brandt will not show the books. Ask why a steward hides what he keeps." It was the fair laughing gentleman from the wedding who first treated her as though she were real. His name was Major Lionel Frost, and he had soldiered with the Duke in the Peninsula years before, and he came down to Ravensmoor in the 3rd week of her marriage to shoot and to drink the Duke's claret, of which there was still, somehow, a great deal. He found her in the library, where she had taken to sitting, because it was one of the 4 warm rooms, reading the late Duke's bound estate surveys, with the green lamp at her elbow. "Good God," he said from the doorway. "She reads land surveys for pleasure." "Not for pleasure," Marian said without looking up. "For information." "They are different things, Major, though I grant they look alike from the door." He laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, and came in and sat down across from her without being asked, which she found she did not mind. He turned his signet ring around his finger and studied her with frank curiosity. "You're not at all what they said you'd be," he told her. "What did they say I'd be?" "Vulgar," he said with a soldier's bluntness. "Grasping. A draper's daughter in diamonds, all elbows and ambition." He had the grace to look a little ashamed. "Crispin certainly painted you so. To hear him talk, you'd think he'd married a counting-house clerk in a wig. My father is not a draper. He is a shipping merchant, and I have never in my life worn a diamond, and I think a counting-house clerk a more useful creature than most men I have met in this county," Marian said and turned a page. "But otherwise the portrait is accurate. I am grasping. I grasp at the truth of things." "I find it slips away, if one does not hold it firmly." Major Frost turned his signet ring once around his finger and studied her, the laughter draining out of his easy face. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, suddenly serious. "I'll tell you something, Duchess, because I think you've a spine, and I think you'll need it. Crispin Vane is the proudest man I know, and pride like his is a kind of illness. It tells him that anything bought is beneath him, even when buying it is the only thing keeping his roof on his head. He married your money because he had no choice, and he will never forgive you for it. That is not fair to you. It is not even sensible of him. But it is true, and you'd best know it." He sat back. "And to anyone listening, if you've come this far with the Duchess, stay with her, because I have a soldier's nose for who wins a campaign, and I would not bet against this one. Now, where does he keep the good brandy?" She showed him where the Duke kept the good brandy, and she thought, "He will never forgive me for being his salvation." She had been called many things. She had never before been hated for being the rescue. The first proof of how useful her unwanted craft would be came on a raw afternoon 4 days later, when a man arrived at the front door of Ravensmoor with a leather case under his arm and a hard set to his mouth, and asked for the Duke, and would not be turned away. The Duke was out. The Duke was, as he generally was, somewhere on the cold acres of his land, brooding over them, and the footman, flustered, did the only thing he could think of, and brought the visitor to the morning room, where the Duchess sat with the green lamp and the late Duke's surveys, and the man looked at her plain gray wool and her ringless throat, for she wore only the garnet, and decided, in the way such men decide, that she was the housekeeper. "I'll wait for the master," he said, not unkindly, the way a man speaks to a servant. "It's a money matter. Above your head, I'd think." "It very rarely is," Marian said. "Sit if you like. You have come about a debt. Tell me which, and to whom, and how much, and we shall see whether it is above my head or merely beneath my husband's notice, which is a different failing." The man, whose name was Mr. Combe, and who held a quantity of the 8th Duke's old paper bought cheap in the hope of squeezing the 9th, looked at her more carefully. Then, because there was something in the level voice that made a man answer plainly, he opened his case, and told her, £320 with the interest, owing since the late Duke's day, and he had been put off 4 times by the steward, and he had come at last to make a noise about it, because a man who is owed and laughed at will eventually make a noise. "You have been put off 4 times by Mr. Brant," Marian repeated. She turned the brass key of the lamp a quarter turn, so the green light steadied, and reached for paper. "And yet I will lay you a wager, Mr. Combe, that Mr. Brant entered each of those 4 visits in his book as a payment made. £320, you say? Show me the original note." He showed her. She read it the way her father had taught her to read a note, for the date and the hand and the rate, and the small dishonest words that money men hide in the middle of a line, and she found one, a compounding the late Duke had plainly never agreed to, and she set her finger on it. "This much you are owed," she said, writing a figure, "and this much you have added on, and shall not have, because the late Duke never signed for it, and I will not pay a penny that a court would laugh at. You will take the true sum today, in full, and you will sign me a discharge, and you will go home and tell every man in your trade that the Duchess of Ravensmoor pays what is honestly owed on the day it is asked, and not 1 shilling that is not. That is a better thing to be owed by than a duke who will not see you. Have we a bargain?" Mr. Combe looked at the figure, and at the discharge she had already begun to write out in her small clear hand, and at the green lamp, and at the merchant's daughter, who had read his dishonest note, like a manifest, and he laughed. Once, the surprised laugh of a hard man, who has met someone harder and fairer than himself, and he said, "Aye, we've a bargain, your grace. I took you for the housekeeper." "I know you did," Marian said, and paid him, and got her discharge, and added Mr. Combe's £320 to the lengthening list in her desk of debts the steward had sworn were settled and never paid. Another thread in the pattern. She was only beginning to see whole. When the Duke came in from his ride, she did not tell him a creditor had been at his door, because he would not have thanked her, and because she was no longer working for his thanks. She had begun, without quite naming it, to work for the house itself. The cruelty, when it became public, was always dressed as society. The first great test came at the Ravensmoor Harvest Ball, which the Duke gave because Vanes had always given it, because the county expected it, because a Duke too poor to feast his neighbors was a Duke who admitted he was poor. It cost money he did not have. Money she had brought, and Marian saw the irony of it and said nothing, because by then she had begun to understand that her dowry was being spent very fast indeed, far faster than even a ruined estate could account for, and she wanted to see where. She came down to the ball in dove-gray silk, modest and well-cut, with her mother's garnet ring on her hand, and no other jewel, and she was beautiful in the quiet way that does not announce itself, and the whole county turned to look at the merchant's daughter who had bought herself a coronet. The Duke did not dance with her. He danced the opening set with Lady Sybil Carew. Lady Sybil was the daughter of an earl and the widow of a baronet, and the most admired beauty in 3 counties, and she had wanted to be Duchess of Ravensmore since she was 16, and she had been cheated of it, everyone knew, by a shipping merchant's bank draft. She was golden-haired and white-shouldered, and she wore sapphires that caught the candlelight. And when she danced with the Duke, she laughed up at him with her whole lovely face, and she carried a fan of carved ivory that she snapped open and shut, like a small white blade. After the set, Lady Sybil crossed the floor directly to where Marian stood, and the people near them went quiet to listen, the way the gossiping room always went quiet to listen. "Your Grace," Lady Sybil said, and curtsied, and the curtsy was a fraction too deep, which is its own kind of insult. "How brave of you to come down. I know how trying these great occasions can be, when one is not accustomed." She snapped the fan open. "My dear, is that little garnet your only ornament? I declare, with all your father's ships, I expected you'd be quite weighed down. But then I suppose trade has its own notions of what is fine." She snapped the fan shut. Marian looked at the fan. Then she looked at Lady Sybil with an expression of perfect pleasant interest. "It was my mother's," she said. "She was the daughter of a baronet who lost his fortune backing a man who lied to him. She married my father with nothing but this ring and her good sense. And she taught me that good sense outlasts sapphires, because sapphires can be sold to pay a man's debts, but good sense cannot be taken from you in the night." She smiled. It was a kind smile, which made it worse. "I find I value it more than I would value a great many stones. But it was good of you to notice it, Lady Sybil. So few people notice the things that last." The fan stopped, half open. Lady Sybil's lovely color rose, and someone near them, a dowager, one of the sharp-eyed ones, made a sound that was almost a laugh and turned it into a cough. Across the room, the Duke of Ravensmore watched this exchange. He could not have heard the words, but he saw the fan stop, and he saw the color in Lady Sybil's face, and he saw his wife, the merchant's daughter, the purchase, the embarrassment, standing straight and calm in her plain gray silk, while the most admired beauty in 3 counties lost her countenance, and something moved in his cold gray eyes that he did not like and could not name, and he turned away from it. It was Major Frost, watching from the card-room door, who saw the Duke turn away, and who understood. "Oh, you fool, Crispin," he said softly, into his brandy. "You married a better woman than you have the wit to want." That night, by the green lamp, Marian did her sums. She had been at Ravensmore a month. In that month, her dowry of £40,000 had been received by the estate, and she had, by patient and indirect means, a question here, a glimpse of a tradesman's bill there, a word with the cook about what was ordered and what arrived, assembled a rough notion of what the estate's true wants were, the mortgages on the Devon land, the roof, the drainage, the unpaid wages, the tenant's repairs. She added them in the columns her father had taught her, and she added a generous margin for what she could not see, and she sat back, and she frowned. It did not add up. The estate's debts, even counted handsomely, even with every roof slate and every shilling of back wages, did not come near to swallowing £40,000. Yet she had heard Mr. Brant tell the Duke, gravely, only that week, that the money was near gone already, Your Grace, the obligations being so very pressing. She had heard the Duke receive this news, with the weary contempt of a man who expected nothing else. who had spent his whole life watching money he despised slip through his fingers, and who blamed, somehow, the money itself. Near gone, already, in a month. It was not possible. Unless. She turned the brass key of the lamp a quarter turn, and the green light steadied, and she looked at the figures that did not add up, and the cold clarity came over her that had come over her at the wedding breakfast, the clarity that was the truest thing about her. Someone was stealing from the Duke of Ravensmore. Someone had been stealing for a long time. And the ruin of this house was not an act of God or the price of pride. It was a crime. And she, the bought wife, the trade, the woman not permitted to see the books, was the only person under this roof who had both the eyes to see it and the reason to set it right. She thought of Mrs. Goodale's words. "We've been a long time waiting for someone to set things right." She thought of her father's words. "A roof does not care who paid for it." And she thought, for the first time in her marriage, not of enduring, but of acting. She did not tell her husband. She had no proof, and a man who would not let her see the books would not believe his wife over the steward his father had trusted. She did not tell the major, though she trusted him, because the major drank, and the major talked. She told the lamp, and the lamp kept her counsel, and in the morning she began, very quietly, to hunt. She began with the tradesmen, because tradesmen kept records, and her father's name opened tradesmen's doors. She wrote, in her own hand, to the corn factor and the timber merchant and the wine importer who supplied Ravensmore, requesting, as the new duchess, settling the household accounts, which was entirely proper, copies of their bills for the past 3 years. They came. She laid them beside the sums Mr. Brant had entered in the household ledger, which she contrived to see at last by the simple means of asking Mrs. Goodale, who had a key to the steward's room she was not supposed to have and a long memory of unpaid wages. The bills and the ledger did not match. Where the timber merchant had billed £400, Mr. Brant had entered 6. Where the corn factor had supplied feed for the home farm at one price, Mr. Brant had charged the estate another, higher, and the difference, the patient, monstrous difference, totted up over the years in Marion's small, clear hand, came to thousands, thousands upon thousands. A slow bleed, year over year, dressed as the honest cost of keeping a great house, and skimmed into the soft hands of a smooth gray man who had served the veins for 30 years and robbed them for at least 20. She found more. She found rents collected from tenants and never entered. She found a repair to the east wing that had never been made. The money for it vanished, the wing still rotting. She found, threaded all through it, the second hand. For Brant did not work alone. No man bleeds an estate this long alone. And the second hand, when she traced it, led her somewhere she had not expected, somewhere that made her sit very still by the green light for a long time. It led to Lady Sybil Carew. For Lady Sybil, the cheated beauty, the would-be duchess, was not merely a woman scorned amusing herself by tormenting a merchant's daughter at a ball. Lady Sybil was in debt, deep, secret, gaming debt, the kind a widow of fashion accrues and cannot pay. And Lady Sybil had a cousin who held a great many of those debts and was patient about them, and that cousin was a smooth gray man named Septimus Brant. The steward had been feeding his cousin's beauty out of the Duke's stolen money for years, buying her gowns and paying her gaming markers, keeping her glittering and admired and dangerous. And in return, Lady Sybil had kept the Duke's ear, kept his pride flattered, kept him believing his ruin was the world's fault, and his wife's vulgarity, and never, never the work of the loyal steward at his elbow. It was, Marion thought, a thing of real elegance, as crimes went. Brant bled the estate. Lady Sybil charmed the Duke into never looking, and the two of them, between them, had nearly destroyed an ancient name, and would have finished the work and let the merchant's daughter take the blame, for who would not believe that a great house had been beggared by a vulgar bride's extravagance? They had even, she realized, been counting on her. Her dowry had not come to save the estate. It had come to be stolen, the last great harvest, and her ruin to be the cover. She had her proof now. The bills, the ledger, the unentered rents, the false repair, all of it in her small, clear hand, and all of it lockable in the writing desk beneath the green lamp. She could have gone to her husband. She had decided, at the wedding breakfast, that she would not beg him for anything. But this was not begging. This was a gift, and gifts may be given even to men who do not deserve them. She did not go to him, not yet, because she understood her husband now, as she had come to understand his house, and she knew that if she went to him with this, the bought wife accusing the trusted steward, the trade pointing at the lady, his pride would not let him believe her. He would think her jealous of Sybil. He would think her grasping at the man's place. He would, very likely, defend Brant to her face out of sheer refusal to be saved by the woman he despised. Pride like his, the Major had said, is a kind of illness. So she did the harder thing. She set out to make the truth undeniable, to build it so high and so plain that not even a duke's pride could climb over it. And she set out, at the same time, with no expectation of thanks, to begin quietly saving the estate herself, with her own hands and her own head, and the merchant's craft her husband called vulgar, while she gathered the rope to hang the men who had ruined it. This is the midpoint of our tale, and the turn of it. The wronged woman has stopped enduring. The cleverest person in the house has found the wound, and she has decided to heal it in secret, and to repay contempt, not with vengeance, but with the thing the proud can least forgive, with being saved by the one they scorned. Saving the estate was a thing of figures and patience, and Marian was made of figures and patience. She could not simply confront Brant. He would burn his books and deny everything, and her proof, however good, would become her word against his, and she knew which word a duke would take. So she went around him. She wrote to her father. Josiah Tilney came down to Ravensmoor on a gray morning in November, and the Duke received him with the stiffest taste he kept for tradesmen and dogs, and gave him a quarter of an hour in the library, and then went out to ride, having said, perhaps, 30 words. Marian watched her husband's back disappear toward the stables, and then she shut the library door and turned to her father, and Josiah Tilney looked at his daughter and said, "Well, you did not write 4 pages to tell me the roof leaks. What is it?" She told him. She laid it all on the library table by the green lamp. The bills, the ledger, the unentered rents, the false repair, the long bleed, Brant's hand and Lady Sybil's debts, and the cousinhood between them. Josiah read it all in silence, his thumb moving against his fingertips, counting. When he had finished, he sat back, and there was something in his plain face she had not seen since her mother died. Pride, fierce and whole. "My girl," he said. "My girl found it in a month. They've had 30 years and a duke's trust, and my girl found it in a month with a borrowed key and her mother's eyes." He put his broad hand flat on the papers. "Right. What do you want? Tell me plain. I did not raise you to ask half of what you need." "I want to buy his debts," Marian said. Josiah went still. "The mortgages on the Devon land," she said in the clear, small voice she used for figures. "They are held by a bank in Exeter that owes its standing to your line of credit. You have told me so yourself. I want you to buy them, quietly, so that the Duke of Ravensmoor owes his last great debt not to a stranger's bank, but to me, to his wife, and does not know it. I want the estate redeemed, Papa. Saved entire. The roof, the drainage, the wages, the tenants, not with a gift he could refuse from a woman he despises, with debts he has already incurred, transferred into my hand, so that the saving is done before he can be too proud to be saved. And Brant I will give to him," she said. "When the estate is safe and cannot be burned to hide the crime, I will lay the proof before my husband so plainly he cannot look away, and he will turn Brant out, and Lady Sybil with him, and the whole county will see who beggared the veins. And it will not be the merchant's daughter." She looked at her father. "I do not want vengeance, Papa. I want it set right. There is a difference. Mrs. Goodale taught me the difference without meaning to." Josiah Tilney's thumb went still against his fingertips. A merchant reading a ledger that has, against all odds, come out exactly right. Then he laughed, once, a short bark of pure delight. "By God," he said, "I bought you a duke, and you are going to buy him back his own house, and make him grateful for it, whether his pride likes it or no. Marion, you are worth 10 of him, and 40 of that lady, and the whole of this rotten county thrown in." He stood and gathered the papers. "It shall be done. Exeter by the week's end. And the rest, the roof, the drains, the wages. You'll manage that yourself?" "I will manage it myself," she said. "Quietly. Through the household accounts I now keep, which Mr. Brandt was so kind as to leave to me, never dreaming a woman would understand them. He will think the money goes the way it always went. It will not." She turned the brass key of the lamp a quarter turn, and the green light steadied. "I will save it shilling by shilling under his own roof, Papa, and he will not know until I choose to tell him. And then he will know that trade saved the house, that pride was losing." And so the long, quiet work began, and it was the heart of that winter, and the heart of this story. By day, Marion Tilney was the despised and dutiful Duchess of Ravensmore. She bore her husband's coldness at the dinner table where Lady Sybil was so often a guest, seated above her, laughing her white-shouldered laugh, snapping her ivory fan. She bore the Duke's aunt, Lady Augusta Vane, a tall iron dowager who came for a fortnight and stayed for the season and tapped her cane once on the floor before every verdict, and called Marion the bride, as though it were her name, and bought goods once distinctly, at her own dinner table, to the man beside her, while the Duke heard it and said nothing. Marion bore it all with a straight back and a level eye, and no tears, and the county marveled at the cold patience of the merchant's girl and waited, half hoping for her to break. She did not break. By night she worked. By the green lamp she rebuilt an estate. She paid the cook her 5 months' back wages, and the cook wept and told no one. She had the stable boy's room given a fire, and saw, somehow, that coal appeared for it, and for the other servants' rooms. And the under-servants who had frozen for years did not know whom to thank, because Mrs. Goodale, sworn to silence, said only, "The household is better managed now," and smoothed her apron flat with both hands. Marion had the worst of the tenants' roofs mended before the December rains, sending the timber and the men herself, in the estate's name, and old Hartley pulled off his cap to a duchess he was learning to look in the eye. She had the drainage on the home farm begun. She paid the corn factor and the timber merchant honestly, and at their true prices, and they wrote to her father that the new Duchess of Ravensmore settled her accounts to the penny, which was more than the old steward had ever done, and word of that went up and down the trade like a tide, and the credit of the great rotting name began, very quietly, to mend, not because a duke had grown rich, but because a merchant's daughter paid what she owed, and in Exeter, the mortgages on the Devon land passed, by a chain of papers no duke would ever trace, from a provincial bank into the hand of Marion, Duchess of Ravensmore, and the last great debt of the house came home to roost in his own wife's keeping. And Crispin Vane drank his claret and despised his fortune's source, and did not know that he had already, quietly, been saved. But the cruelest blow of the whole long winter was still to fall, and it fell, as these things do in public, before the assembled county, on the night of the 12th night assembly at Carrowmere. Lady Sybil Carow had not lasted 2 years at the side of a clever thief without learning to read the wind, and the wind had changed. She had marked the new credit of the Ravensmore name, the paid tradesman, the mended roofs, the merchant's daughter who settled accounts to the penny. She had heard from her cousin Brandt, white about the mouth for the first time in 30 years, that the Duchess had been asking after old bills. She did not yet know how much Marion had found. But she knew that the safest place for a guilty woman is behind a louder accusation. And so she resolved, before the suspicion could harden, to fix the whole ruin publicly and forever upon the only person in the county with no name to defend her, the wife. She chose her ground well. The 12th night assembly was the great gathering of the season, every family of the county in one bright candlelit room, and the Duke was present, and so was Lady Augusta, iron and disapproving, and so, in dove-gray silk and her mother's garnet, was Marian. Lady Sybil waited until the music paused and the room was quiet enough to carry a voice, and then she said sweetly to the wide-eyed young matrons gathered about her, but pitched for the whole assembly to hear, "One does pity the dear Duke, to have sold his ancient name for a merchant's gold, and to find the gold runs through her fingers faster than ever the debts could. For they do say the household at Ravensmoor spends now like a nabob's, fires in every grate, money flung at every tenant, the tradesmen all aflutter. Bought blood will tell, my dears. It does not know how to keep. I fear the poor man married his ruin, and not his rescue." She snapped open her ivory fan. But then, what is a man of his breeding to do? One cannot make a duchess of a counting house. It was beautifully done. It took the truth, the spending, the warmth, the flung open purse, and turned it inside out, so that Marian's secret salvation of the house looked like a vulgar woman beggaring it, and every head in that bright room turned, and the whisper ran down the assembly, the way it always ran, and the faces that turned to Marian were no longer merely curious. They were contemptuous, and worse, they were pitying, because the county had decided in a single sentence that the merchant's daughter was finishing the ruin of a great house, and there is no defense a proud silence can make against a pity like that. The Duke went very still by the card-room door. Lady Augusta's knuckles whitened on her cane. And Marian, who could have produced, then and there, the proof in her desk that would have turned the whole room on its head, who could have named the thief and his cousin, and the 30-year bleed, and watched Lady Sybil's lovely face come apart. Marian did none of it. Because the estate was not yet wholly safe. Because Brant could still burn his books if she struck too soon. Because she had decided, at a wedding breakfast a lifetime ago, that she would not crawl, and crawling and brawling for a room's good opinion were only 2 doors into the same small house. So she set down her glass. She crossed the floor, straight-backed, unhurried, every eye upon her, and she stopped before Lady Sybil, and she said, in a voice that did not tremble and did not rise, clear enough for the listening room, "You are very sure of what runs through whose fingers, Lady Sybil?" It is a thing I have noticed about people who have never had to keep accounts of their own. They are wonderfully confident about other people's. I keep mine to the penny. One day, when it suits me, I shall be glad to show the county exactly where every shilling of this house has gone, and into whose hands, and who has kept it warm. She let that sit one heartbeat in the silence. Until that day, I find I would rather be thought to spend foolishly than to lie elegantly. Good night. And she turned, and she found her cloak, and she walked out of the Carrowmere assembly with her head up, while the whole county watched, and not one soul understood that they had just heard a promise and a threat dressed as a courtesy. In the carriage home, she did not weep. She turned the brass key of the green lamp her father had given her, where it sat wrapped beside her, a quarter turn in the dark, just to feel it steady, and she said to it, very low, "Soon, not yet, but soon." It was the lowest night of her marriage, and she walked through it on her own 2 feet, and that, though she did not know it, was the night the Duke, watching his despised wife walk out unbroken under the contempt of all his world, first understood that he was ashamed of himself and not of her. He noticed the warmth before he noticed anything else. That was the strange beginning of his undoing, though the assembly had been the true beginning of hers being known. He came in cold from riding one December afternoon into a house that had always been cold, and the servants' hall as he passed it was warm, and a fire was lit, and the underservants stood straighter than he had ever seen them, and he stopped, frowning, because a man does not examine his own comfort until it changes. He found Mrs. Goodale, and asked her, almost suspiciously, why the house was warm. "The household's better managed now, Your Grace," she said, and smoothed her apron flat with both hands, and would say no more. He noticed the tenants next. He rode his lands as he always rode them, to be alone, and to brood over the ruin of his name, and the ruin was mending. Hartley's roof was sound, the drainage was dug. A tenant he had expected to lose to despair touched his cap and said, "Things is looking up, Your Grace. Thanks be." And the Duke rode on, troubled, because he had ordered none of this, and could not think who had. He asked Brant. Brant, smooth and gray, told him the estate was turning a corner, Your Grace. These things come round in time, the management being sound. And the Duke, who wanted to believe his ruin was the world's doing, and his recovery the world's mercy, almost let it pass. But pride is not the same as stupidity, and Crispin Vane was not a stupid man, only a proud and wounded one, and somewhere in him a small, clear voice had begun to ask, "Who?" It was the night the weir broke that he first saw her at her work, and could not unsee it. A week of December rain had swollen the home farm stream, and the old weir above the low meadows. The weir Brant had charged the estate £40 to repair 2 winters past, and never touched, gave way an hour after dark, and the water came down upon the cottages where Hartley and 3 other families lived, cold and black and rising. The alarm reached the great house as a hammering at the kitchen door, and a boy's voice cracking with fear, and the Duke was from home, dining 10 miles off, and there was no steward to be found, and into that gap stepped the Duchess of Ravensmore, in a plain dark gown with a lantern in her hand. She did not panic, because panic was not in her, and she did not wait for a man's leave, because there was no man to give it. She had read the surveys. She knew the land. She knew from the late Duke's own maps studied by green lamplight, where the high ground lay, and where the second sluice was that could be opened to draw the water off east, away from the cottages, into the fallow field where it could do no harm, but to the mud. She gave her orders in the clear, small voice she used for figures, and because the orders were right, the frightened men obeyed them. She sent the stable hands with mattocks to break the second sluice. She had the families brought up to the great house, to the warm servants' hall, to the kitchens, to fires the despised merchant's daughter had filled with coal, and she had blankets fetched and broth set on, and she carried old Hartley's grandchild herself, a small, shivering boy, wrapped in her own shawl, up through the rain to the warm. The Duke came home at midnight, to a house ablaze, with lights it had never been able to afford to burn, and his cold marble hall full of his tenants, alive and dry and warm, and a child asleep in a nest of blankets by the kitchen fire, and his wife, soaked to the skin, her dark auburn hair come down about her shoulders, her sleeves pushed back from arms reddened with cold water, standing over a pot of broth and ladling it out with her own hands to the men who had saved the cottages on her word. He stood in the doorway, in his fine dry evening clothes, and he looked at her, and he did not know what to say, because nothing in his pride had prepared him for the sight of his purchase, his embarrassment, his trade, standing wet and unbeautiful and entirely in command of his own house, in the 1 hour it had truly needed commanding. "The weir went," she said to him simply, not pausing in her ladling. It had never been mended, whatever the accounts may say. "I have drawn the water east. The cottages will stand. No one is lost. They will go home in the morning when it is light and the ground is red. Hartley's grandson has a fever from the cold and will stay by the fire tonight, and I shall sit up with him, for his mother is worn out." She looked at him then, level, across the steam. "You may go up to bed, Your Grace. There is nothing here that wants a duke. It is all only management after all." It was the nearest she ever came to throwing his own contempt back in his face, and she did it without heat, which made it land all the harder. And Crispin Vane, 9th Duke of Ravensmore, did not go up to bed. He took off his fine coat, and he rolled back his fine sleeves, and he came and stood beside his wife at the kitchen fire, and he ladled broth, awkwardly, badly, into the bowls of his own astonished tenants until the small hours, and it was the first honest work his hands had done in his life, and the first night of his marriage he was not ashamed of. It was the matter of the wages that opened his eyes the second crack. The cook, made bold by 5 months' back pay, and a kind word, said something to the new footman, and the new footman said something to the major, who was again at Ravensmore drinking the claret, and the major, turning his signet ring around his finger, came to find the Duke in the library on a black December evening, and shut the door and said, "Crispin, a question. Who paid the servants?" The Duke looked up from the fire. "Brant pays the servants." "Brant has not paid the servants in 5 months. Did not pay them, rather, until quite lately. The cook was owed since the summer. The whole hall was owed. And then, all at once, a few weeks passed, they were paid, to the penny, back to the day. And the rooms got fires, and the roofs got mended, and nobody can say who gave the order." Major Frost sat down across from him. "Somebody is running this estate, Crispin. Somebody clever and somebody quiet. And it is not you, and I would stake my commission it is not Brant. Because Brant has been telling you for a month that the money's gone, and yet here is the money, doing good work. So I ask you again, as your oldest friend and a man who likes to know who is winning. Who?" The Duke of Ravensmore sat very still, and the small, clear voice in him said a thing his pride had refused to let it say for a month, and the thing it said was a name. He did not believe it at first. He would not. He went instead to the household accounts, to the ledger Brant kept, which he had never troubled to open, because the keeping of accounts was beneath a Vane, and the looking at them very nearly as bad. He opened it now, by candlelight, alone, and he found 2 hands in it. He found Brant's hand, smooth and false, in the old entries, and he found, in the recent pages, a second hand, small, clear, exact, a hand that totted each column and carried each figure, and balanced each page to the penny, a hand that paid the cook, and mended the roofs, and bought the coal, a hand he had seen exactly once before. On a list of names she had asked the servants. On a note of thanks she had left Mrs. Goodale. His wife's hand. He sat with the ledger open under the candle for a long time. The merchant's daughter. The purchase. The trade he had married and forgotten the name of, and seated below the salt, and let his aunt call bought goods. She had taken the accounts he had thought too vulgar to dirty his own hands with, and she had been quietly, secretly, without a word of credit or complaint, saving his house by the very craft he despised, the craft of trade, the craft he had married her father's money to escape, and married her person to punish. He went to find her, and he did not know, climbing the stair past the 4 centuries of Vanes whose name she had been mending, whether he meant to thank her or to rage at her. And that not knowing was the first honest feeling his pride had let him have in a very long time. He found her in her room, by the green lamp, the lamp he had once ordered hung in the servants' hall as a joke. A merchant's lamp in a duke's house. How droll. And she had quietly taken it back, and set it on her desk, and worked by it every night to save the very men who had laughed. She was working by it now, the bills spread before her, her dark auburn head bent, her straight back straighter than ever, and she looked up when he came in, and her hazel eyes were calm and unsurprised, as though she had been expecting him for some weeks, which she had. "Your Grace," she said, and began to rise. "Sit," he said, more roughly than he meant. He stood in the doorway. He did not know how to be in a room with her. He had spent a month making certain he never was. "I have seen the accounts." "Yes," Marian said. She set down her pen. "I thought you would, eventually. Major Frost is observant, and the cook can no longer keep from being grateful, which I do not begrudge her. You paid the wages. Yes, you mended the roofs, the drainage, the coal, all of it." His voice was not steady, which appalled him. "With the household money, which I gave to Brant, which Brant told me was gone." "Brant lied to you," Marion said simply. "He has been lying to you for years, and to your father before you. He has been stealing from this estate since before you inherited it, and the ruin of your house is his work, not God's, and not your father's, and not, your grace, the price of pride. Whatever you have told yourself, I have the proof, every shilling of it, in my desk." She folded her hands. "I did not pay the wages with money Brant had. I paid them with money I found, by spending honestly what he spent falsely. There was a great deal more money in this house than he ever let you see. He simply took most of it." The Duke of Ravensmoor came into the room, slowly, and sat down in the chair across from her, uninvited, the way the Major did, and put his head in his hands. And when he spoke, his voice was low and stripped bare. "Why," he said, "I have given you nothing, less than nothing. I married your money and despised you to your face. I forgot your name at our own wedding. I let them say what they said. I have been, this whole month, exactly the man my father warned me never to be, and I told myself it was honor, and it was only pride and cruelty wearing pride's coat. Why would you save me? Why would you save any of it? You owe me nothing, madam. You owe me less than nothing." And Marion Tilney looked at the proud, broken man in her plain little chair, and she did not gloat, because she was not made for gloating, and she did not soften too quickly, because she was not made for that, either. "I did not save you," she said. "Not at first. I did not even do it for you. I did it because my father raised me to finish what I am paid to finish, and I was paid to save this house, and so I am saving it. I did it because there were people freezing under your roof who had done you nothing but good, and I could warm them, and a person who can do a kindness and does not is not a person I wish to be." She paused. The green light steadied between them. "And I did it, your grace, because somewhere in this cold month I stopped wishing to be the woman who let your house fall because you were unkind to her. That would have made your unkindness the master of me. I would rather be the master of myself. So I saved your house, not because you deserved it, because I chose who I would be in it." The Duke lifted his head and looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time since she had come down the aisle in ivory silk while he stared at the rain. And what was in his face was not pride and was not contempt. It was shame. And under the shame, dawning, was something that frightened him far more. Respect, and the beginning of the thing. Respect becomes when it is given to a face one has begun, too late, to find beautiful. "Show me the proof," he said. "Brant, all of it. Show me, and I will tear it out of this house by the roots, and I will—" He stopped. He was not, he found, a man with much practice at the words. "I do not know how to begin to deserve what you have done, but I should like, at least, to stop standing in the way of it." So she showed him, by the green lamp, page by page, the small, clear hand laid out the long crime. Brant's false bills, the doubled timber, the unentered rents, the repair that was never made, the thousands bled away year over year. And then, because honesty is honesty, she showed him the last and worst of it. The part she had known would wound his pride most cruelly of all, and she did not spare him, because she had learned that sparing a proud man, the truth is only another way of holding him in contempt. Brant did not work alone, she said. He had a partner in the house, someone who kept your trust while he kept your books, someone whose debts he paid out of your stolen money, and who repaid him by keeping your eyes turned away from him and toward me. She met his gaze. "It was Lady Sybil Carew, Your Grace. She is Brant's cousin. She is ruined by gaming and has been for years, and he has kept her gowned and glittering with your money, and she has kept you flattered and blind and angry at your wife, which suited them both. She came to your table to watch the house she helped to rob. They meant for my dowry to be the last of it, and my name to take the blame. A vulgar bride beggars a great house. Who would not believe it?" The Duke of Ravensmore went very white, and then very still, and Marian watched him take the blow. Watched a proud man learn that the woman he had defended and the man he had trusted had used his own pride as the lever to pry his house apart, and that the wife he had scorned was the only honest creature who had stood in his corner the whole while. He stood, He drew off his gloves, finger by finger, the way he did when he was at his coldest, and his voice when it came was quiet and terrible. "I will deal with Mr. Brant," he said, "in the morning, before witnesses, with the proof in my hand, and Lady Sybil Carew will be received at Ravensmore over my corpse, and I will see that every house in this county knows precisely why." He looked down at his own gloved no longer hands. "And then, madam, I will spend whatever is left to me, and I am aware it is your spending, now, all of it, which is its own justice, learning to be a man you might one day not be ashamed to have saved." The reckoning came the next morning, and the county would speak of it for 30 years. The Duke of Ravensmore did not have his steward quietly dismissed. He summoned him to the great marble hall. The cold, ringing hall there had never been coal enough to warm, though there was coal enough now, and a great fire roared in the hearth that the merchant's daughter had filled, and he summoned witnesses to it, Mrs. Goodale, and old Hartley up from the home farm, and Major Frost, and the agent from Exeter, and his aunt, Lady Augusta, who tapped her cane and demanded to know the meaning of this vulgar display, and by a cruel and exact arrangement, Lady Sybil Carew, invited to a morning call she did not know was a trial. And in the center of that hall, on the marble, the Duke had a table set, and on the table by the green counting-house lamp carried down from his wife's room at his own order, he laid the proof, the false bills, the true bills, the doubled figures, the unentered rents, the phantom repair, and beside them, in the small clear hand the whole county would come to know, the Duchess of Ravensmore's accounting of the whole long theft, totted and carried and balanced to the penny. "Mr. Brant," the Duke said. He stood very straight. He had drawn off his gloves. "Account to me for these." Septimus Brant looked at the table, and his soft gray face did not change at first, for he had brazened out suspicion before. He began, smoothly, to speak of tangled accounts unfit for a lady's understanding, of the Duchess's inexperience, of figures a woman might easily mistake. "My wife," said the Duke of Ravensmore, in a voice that stopped him like a wall, "totted these columns to the penny while you told me the money was gone. My wife found in 1 month what you hid for 30 years. You will not stand in my hall and call her mistaken. You will account for the doubled timber, or you will be silent, and I will let the magistrate account for it instead." And Brant was silent. The soft hands that had robbed an ancient house for 30 years had no answer, because there was no answer, because Marian Tilney had built the truth so high and so plain that not even a duke's loyalty could have climbed over it, and the duke was not even trying. Brant was silent, and his silence was his confession, and the witnesses in the cold, warm hall saw it. Lady Sybil rose, white-shouldered, her ivory fan in her hand. "Your Grace, I cannot think why I have been brought to witness a squalid matter of servants, and—" "You were brought, Lady Sybil," the Duke said, and turned his cold gray eyes upon her, "because Septimus Brant is your cousin, and because the gowns you have worn to my table were bought with money stolen from my house, and because you have spent 2 years keeping me a fool, so that he might keep me a beggar. I have it in writing. From Exeter, the markers he paid for you, the dates, the amounts. He let that sit in the ringing hall. You came here to watch my wife take the blame for your ruin. Look at her now." And the whole hall looked at her now, at Marian, Duchess of Ravensmore, standing straight and calm by the green lamp in her dove-gray silk and her mother's plain garnet ring. The merchant's daughter, the trade, the bought goods, who had saved the house that all of them had watched fall, and not one of them had lifted a hand to catch. Lady Sybil's fan snapped open, snapped shut, and found nothing to say, and her lovely face crumpled into something old and frightened, and she gathered her skirts and fled the hall, and the great door boomed shut behind her. And that was the last that Ravensmore ever saw of Lady Sybil Carew. Brant was given to the magistrate. The proof was beyond dispute. And the law, which is slow to believe a woman and quick to believe a column of figures, believed the column of figures, and Septimus Brant was undone, and the long bleed was stopped, and stopped forever. And Lady Augusta Vane, who had called the Duchess bought goods at her own table, stood in the cold, warm hall and looked at the proof, and at the lamp, and at the straight-backed young woman who had saved the family name from a ruin the whole proud clan had been too proud to even examine. And the iron old woman tapped her cane once upon the marble, and then, to the astonishment of everyone present, she crossed the hall, and she took Marian's hand in both of her own, and she said, in a voice gone rough, "I was wrong about you, girl. I have been wrong about a great many things, but never so wrong as this, and never so glad to be." She pressed the small, straight hand. "You are the best of what this family has got in 3 generations, and the only one of us with the wit to prove it. The name is yours now. You earned it. God help any creature in this county that says otherwise within my hearing." It was, Mrs. Goodale said afterward, the only time in 19 years she had seen Lady Augusta moved, and she had smoothed her apron flat with both hands to keep from weeping at the sight of it. The county, which had come to laugh, stayed to marvel, and then, in the way of counties, decided it had always known. The story went up and down the trade, and up and down the gentry both. The new Duchess of Ravensmore, the merchant's daughter, had uncovered a 30-year theft, turned out a thieving steward and a ruined beauty, and saved an ancient house by her own cleverness and her own hands, and had done it all while her husband scorned her, and had never once begged him to stop. It was a far better story than a vulgar bride beggaring a duke, and it had the additional merit of being true, and society, which loves a reversal almost as much as it loves a scandal, took Marian Tilney to its bosom with the shameless enthusiasm of people who have decided to pretend they were on your side all along. She was asked everywhere. The same doors that had stayed shut to her wedding stood open now. The same dowagers who had come to her harvest ball to watch her fail came now to be seen at her dinners, and she received them with the level courtesy she gave to everyone, the housekeeper and the earl alike, because she had learned long ago that a person's worth was not the height of their seat. She did not gloat. She did not need to. Her straight back said it for her, every time she entered a room that had once tried to shut her out, and the whispers that ran down those rooms now were a very different sort of whisper. But the heart of it, the thing this story has been walking toward through the whole long candlelit winter, was not the county's praise. It was the man. Crispin Vane did not win his wife back with a single apology, because there was no winning back what had never been won, and because Marian Tilney was not a woman to be reconciled by words from a man who had given her a month of contempt. He knew it, to his credit, and he had, it turned out, more credit in him than his pride had ever let him spend. He did not try to buy his way back with charm, having no money that was not hers, nor with grand gestures, having learned at last that grand gestures were the pride that had nearly ruined him. He did the harder thing. He earned her slowly, by changes she could see and weigh, the way she weighed everything. He sat down with the books, the Duke of Ravensmore, who had thought the keeping of accounts beneath a vein, sat down at the writing desk by the green lamp beside his wife, in the firelight, and asked her, humbly, awkwardly, a proud man learning a new language late, to teach him to read his own estate. And she taught him. Night after night, through that mending winter, the merchant's daughter taught the Duke to tot a column, and carry a figure, and tell an honest bill from a false one, so that no Brant would ever bleed his house again, so that the saving of it would not depend forever on her watching. And he was a poor pupil at first, and then a better one. And when at last he balanced a page to the penny on his own, and looked up at her, flushed with a small, honest pride that had nothing of his old illness in it, she smiled at him. Really smiled, the first true smile she had given him. And he understood that he had been given something he had not known how to want. He made restitution where restitution could be made. He found, with her help, the tenants Brant had cheated worst, and he repaid them out of the recovered money, going himself to the home farm, hat in hand, to old Hartley, and saying the words a duke does not easily say. And Hartley wept, and so, very nearly, did the duke. He took the men who had served him faithfully, and served him unpaid, and he saw them right, and he gave Mrs. Goodale, who had kept his wife's secret and warmed his servants, and waited 19 years for someone to set things right, a pension that would keep her in comfort to the end of her days. And Mrs. Goodale smoothed her apron flat with both hands, and told him, with the freedom of an old servant, that it was the Duchess he should thank. And the Duke said quietly, "I know it, Mrs. Goodale. I am learning to thank her. It takes a man some time, when he has been a fool, to learn to thank the person who proved it." And he learned to tell the truth about her, which for a proud man is the hardest restitution of all. At the first great dinner, Ravensmore gave after the reckoning, a true one this time, with the great families come and the fires roaring, and the house mended and warm. The Duke of Ravensmore rose at the head of his own table, with his Duchess at the foot of it, where a duchess sits. And he did a thing no one had ever heard a Vane do. He told the truth on himself. "You have all heard, by now, what was done to this house," he said, "and what was done to save it. You have heard it was my wife who found the theft that beggared us, and my wife who turned out the thief, and my wife who paid the wages and mended the roofs and kept the credit of this name, when its own master was too proud to keep it himself." He looked down the long candlelit table to where she sat, straight-backed, the green lamp set, at his own order, now, and not as a joke, among the silver, its small green light, the warmest thing on the board. "What you may not have heard is that I did not deserve it, that I married her for her father's fortune, and gave her my contempt in exchange, and that she saved me anyway, not because I had earned it, but because she was a better creature than I knew how to recognize. I am telling you so now. I would rather you heard the truth of my wife from me than the lie of her from anyone else, ever again." He raised his glass. "To the Duchess of Ravensmore, who saved this name, and to whom this name, and the man who carries it, will spend the rest of their days trying to be worth." And the great families rose in the warm and mended hall, and drank to the merchant's daughter, and Lady Augusta Vane tapped her cane once on the floor and said, "Here, here," in a voice that brooked no dissent, and Major Frost, turning his signet ring around his finger, leaned to the man beside him and said, "I told her she'd win the campaign. I have a soldier's nose for it." And Marian sat very still at the foot of the table, by the green light, and did not weep, because she was not made for weeping in public, but her father, for Josiah Tilney had been invited, and seated high, in the place of honor, and the county had been made to like it. Her father caught her eye down the length of the candlelit board, and his thumb moved once against his fingertips, counting, and she knew he was counting the same thing she was. that the account was, at last, balanced. She did not give the Duke her love because he asked for it. She gave it to him the way she gave everything, slowly, and with her eyes open, and only when the figures added up. The winter turned to a late wet spring, and the Devon land greened, and the roof held against the March rains it had never held against before, and somewhere in those mending months, without any single moment she could have marked, Marian Tilney found that the cold contract she had married had become a warm thing, and that the proud man who had forgotten her name had learned it so thoroughly he said it like a prayer, and that when she came into a room now, his cold gray eyes were not cold at all, and went to her the way a man's eyes go to the one fixed point in a turning world. It was by the green lamp, of course, that he told her. Where else? He had taken to working beside her of an evening, the two of them over the estate books, and one night in April he set down his pen, and he was quiet, and then he said, "A proud man, still, but a proud man who had learned to spend his pride on the right things. I married you for your money, Marian. I have made no secret of it ever, which is the one poor virtue in the whole sorry business. So I want there to be no mistaking me now." He took her hand, the right one, the one with her mother's plain garnet ring. "I am telling you that I love you, not your fortune, which is spent, and was always more honorably yours than mine, not your father's ships. You, the straight back, and the small clear hand, and the level eye, and the heart that warmed my freezing servants, while I was too proud to notice they were cold. I love you, and I have no claim on your loving me, and I will wait as long as it takes you to be sure. Because the one thing I have learned in all of this is that you are never wrong about a sum, and I would not have you make an exception for me." And Marian Tilney looked at her husband by the green light of her father's lamp, the lamp he had once hung in the servants' hall as a joke, and now kept among the silver as the most honored thing in the house. And she turned the small brass key a quarter turn, so the green light steadied between them, the way she did before she answered anything that mattered. "I have done the figures," she said. "I have been doing them all winter. I did not let myself believe them until I was sure, because I am not a woman who likes to be wrong about a sum, as you say." She let her hand stay in his. "You were unkind to me, Crispin, and I have not forgotten it, and I never will, because forgetting would be a lie, and I do not trade in those. But a person is not the worst month of their life. I have watched you spend a whole winter learning to be the man you should have been, and you have not asked me once to forget the man you were, which is the only way I could ever have believed the changing of it." The smile came, slow and true. "The figures add up. I love you too. I think I have for some weeks, and only stopped fighting it when I ran out of reasons. I do not generally lose arguments. I find I do not mind losing this one." And the proud Duke of Ravensmore, who had married her for money and despised her to her face and been saved by her anyway, lifted his wife's hand to his lips and kissed the plain garnet ring that good sense had outlasted sapphires to keep, and outside the window the April rain fell soft on a roof that would not leak, on a house that was warm, on an ancient name that a merchant's daughter had not only saved, but made, at last, worth the saving. They were married a second time in their own hearts that spring, and it took, as the true marriages do. The story does not end at the reckoning, because the watchers of such tales are right to want to know what came after, and what came after was a life. It was a good life, and a long one, and it was built, as the best things are, slowly, and to the penny. Ravensmore did not become rich overnight, because nothing honest does, and Marian would have distrusted it if it had. But under the joint and now openly acknowledged management of the Duke and his Duchess, the estate that had been bleeding for 30 years began, year over year, to mend and then to prosper. The home farm drained and then flourished. The tenants, repaired and treated fairly, and never again cheated, paid their rents in full because for the first time in living memory, the rents were fair and the roofs were sound, and the land that had been despaired of became, within 5 years, one of the best-run estates in the county, a thing the gentry studied and the trade respected, which were two worlds that had never before agreed on anything, and now agreed on the Duchess of Ravensmore. She kept the books to the end of her days, though she taught her husband to keep them too, and later taught their children, all of them, the daughters as carefully as the sons, because she had not forgotten what it was to be a clever woman told that figures were beneath her, and she swore the daughters of her house would never be told it. There were 4 children in the end, and the eldest, a dark auburn-headed girl with her mother's level eye and her grandfather's head for sums, would grow up to manage the whole estate herself one day with a competence that scandalized and then delighted the county, and she did her childhood sums, as her mother had, beneath the green light of a brass counting-house lamp, because some things in that family were passed down more carefully than the coronet. Josiah Tilney lived to see his grandchildren, and to be received, in his old age, in houses that would once have sent a shipping merchant to the tradesman's entrance, and he bore the honor with the same plain dignity he had borne the insult, his thumb moving against his fingertips, counting, and once, near the end, sitting by the green lamp with his eldest grandchild on his knee, he told the child the whole story of how her mother had saved a duke's house in a single winter, and the child asked whether Grandpapa had been very angry at the duke for being unkind, and Josiah Tilney laughed his short bark of a laugh and said, "Angry, child, I bought him for your mother because I knew what she was. And I knew that a woman like your mother is wasted on an easy life. I did not buy her a husband. I bought her a thing worth doing, and she did it. That is the whole of it. Now mind your carrying. You have dropped a figure in the 2nd column." Major Lionel Frost remained the Duke's closest friend, and the Duchess's most devoted champion to the end of his days. And he never tired of telling the tale of how he had spotted the winner of the campaign before the campaign had hardly begun, turning his signet ring around his finger as he told it, and the story improved a little each time he told it, as a soldier's stories do. But the heart of it stayed true, and the heart of it was that he had been the one man at that cold wedding breakfast who had told the proud fool the woman's name was Marian. Lady Augusta Vane, iron to the last, made the Duchess the chief beneficiary of her own private fortune, over the heads of every blood vein in the kingdom, because, her will said, in her own forthright hand, she is more truly of this family than any of us who were born to it and squandered it, and I will not have the only vein worth the name left a penny behind the rest. She tapped her cane on the floor of heaven, the Major used to say, on the day that will was read, and Mrs. Goodale, housekeeper of 19 years and then of 30, lived out her long life in comfort on her pension, in a cottage on the estate, within sight of the great house she had served and waited in for so long, and on the wall of her parlor, where a humbler woman might have hung a sampler, she hung a single thing, a small framed card, in the Duchess's own small, clear hand, that said only, "Thank you for the warning about the lamp. I kept it. M.R." And when visitors asked her what it meant, the old woman would smooth her apron flat with both hands and smile and say, "It means somebody set things right. In the end, I waited a long time to see it. I was not disappointed." As for the Duke and his Duchess, they grew old by the green light, and the love that had come slowly and to the penny proved the kind that does not run out, because it had been counted honestly at the start and never falsely entered after. He never again, to the end of his life, called anything beneath him for having been earned rather than inherited. He had learned that lesson in the only school that ever truly teaches it, which is the school of being saved by the very thing one scorned. And she never again let a room make her small, because she had learned, in a cold marble hall by the light of her father's lamp, that the truth, totted up plainly and carried out to the penny, is the one fortune no one can steal in the night. On the last evening of this telling, for every life has a last evening, and a story ought to end on a true image and not a false one. They were old, the two of them, and the house was warm, and the rain was soft on the sound roof, and the Duchess of Ravensmore sat at the writing desk by the window where she had sat on her first cold wedding night, when she had made a list that began, "Find out where the money goes." The green lamp was lit. Its brass had gone softer and more golden than ever, with another 40 years of handling. Her hands were older now, the knuckles a little swollen. Her mother's plain garnet ring grown loose upon a thinner finger, but the back was still straight, and the eye was still level, and the small, clear hand still totted the columns to the penny. The Duke came in from the cold of the evening, an old man now, his dark hair gone iron gray, and he stopped in the doorway, the way he had stopped that first December afternoon, when he had noticed, before anything else, that the house was warm. He looked at his wife, by the green light, and he crossed the room, not uninvited now, never uninvited now. And he set his old hand on her straight old shoulder, and he looked down at the column she was totting, and he said the thing he had taught himself to say, the only restitution that never finishes being owed. "Thank you." And Marian, Duchess of Ravensmore, who had been bought to save a house, and had stayed to make it worth the saving, who had repaid contempt with dignity, and theft with truth, and a cold marriage with a warm and chosen love, reached up and turned the small brass key of her father's lamp a quarter turn, so the green light steadied over the both of them, the way it had steadied over her sums when she was a girl, and over the proof that hanged a thief, and over the slow, honest building of a life. "You carried a figure wrong in the second column," she said, and her old eyes were warm, "but the rest of it adds up." It always did, in the end. And the green light held, soft and steady and gold, over the desk, and the open book, and the two old hands, the way it had held over the whole long story, and on the brass base of the lamp, had anyone leaned close to read it in that warm and final glow, was the small engraved line her father had ordered, cut into it the year she was born, the line that had been there all along, beneath the contempt and the theft, and the cold hall, and the slow-earned love. A single counting-house motto, plain as the man who chose it, "Reckon true, and fear no man." She had, and she never had to. That was tonight's chapter from Candlelit Chapters. If her story moved you, if you believe, as she did, that the truth totted up plainly outlasts every sapphire and every sneer, then before you go, do one small thing for the next listener who needs to hear it. Subscribe, so the candle stays lit and the next chapter finds its way to you. Snuff your own candle gently now, and join me by the fire for the next.